Lam Son 719 was to be the first major test of America's plan to turn the war over to the ARVN forces. It became the last major killing ground for the young grunts and chopper pilots in Vietnam. In 1971, Richard Nixon wanted to make a major move against communist strongholds in Laos. The plan was codenamed Lam Son 719, in honor of the birthplace of Le Loi, a Vietnamese nationalist who repelled the Chinese invaders in 1428. The objective was to disrupt an ongoing North Vietnamese army supply buildup at Tichapon, Laos. The battle plan for Lam Son 719 involved an attack by the Airborne Division and the 1st Armored Brigade along Highway 9 to A Lui and then on to Tehipon, where Highway 9 intersected the Ho Chi Minh Trail. 22 miles inside Laos, Tehipone was a major enemy communications and supply hub. The Rangers would establish fire bases north of the highway and protect the right flank. A Marine brigade would remain in reserve near Khe Sanh. Lam Son 719 got underway on February 8, 1971.
There was supposedly all ARVN, the Vietnamese army was going to do it, but the 101st was with them. A few other divisions, I'm not quite sure exactly. Like I said, I didn't know much more than what we had to do at the time.
The operation began as planned with the 1st Armored Brigade Task Force advancing 9 kilometers along Highway 9 on the first day, and with 3 battalions of the 1st Infantry Division air assaulting south of the highway and 2 battalions of the Airborne Division assaulting to the north. By February 25th, the invading forces had discovered enemy supply bases 1 and 2 kilometers square and had cut a major pipeline. With 3 enemy divisions pressuring them, the Rangers began to withdraw from their fire bases. Unable to continue the advance along Highway 9, General Lam decided to use his air-mobile assets to launch an air assault in Tichapon, and on March 6th, 120 Hueys lifted 2 ARVN infantry battalions into the town, capturing it against light enemy resistance. The enemy reacted aggressively, rushing reinforcements to the area, including tanks. The U.S. Army Cobra gunships tried to halt the enemy armor and had some success, sweeping the accompanying infantry from the tanks using 2.75-inch flechette rockets. But they did not stop the tanks. Even when high-explosive anti-tank rockets were available, the results were mixed. A dedicated tank-busting helicopter was sorely needed. The U.S. helicopter crewmen went against the heaviest anti-aircraft barrage incurred in the war. Soon, enemy pressure bogged down the ARVN advance, and poor weather and heavy air defense opposition began to limit the air support available to relieve the pressure. The offensive was halted before reaching their first objective. The stalled troops were pounded again and again by the NVA and Cong forces. Soon they began to withdraw. The ARVN retreat became a rout, and the rout became panic. U.S. commanders tried to save the day by calling in the cavalry. An A troop of the 101st got its orders.
I can't remember really seeing many maps or anything. I can remember getting sent out there. They dropped us off kind of by ourselves, just a gaggle of us, and got on the radio trying to figure out where I was supposed to go. Contact somebody, and they said, we're over here to the west or something like that. So, we just started off in that direction.
But for Lieutenant Wagner, the day was cut short.
The next thing I know, there's an explosion, and one of my guys was laying on the ground. And we're not quite sure exactly at that point really what had happened. So Doc, our medic, he starts to go to the guy, and all of a sudden there's an explosion, he's down. At that point, we're in a minefield. So I told everybody to stay where they were. I had the morphine in my pocket because that's kind of what you did then. And so I took my bayonet out, and I started to probe to work my way over to Doc and to DeMarco was the name of the first guy who was hurt. And I don't remember getting very far. And I don't know if I was on a pressure release or what, but the next thing I knew, I was on the ground too. And you know, I looked back, I could see my foot was all blown apart, and I felt a real sticky feeling between my legs because I'd gotten wounded there too. And at first you just don't know anything, you know, what's going on. You're just kind of stunned, and then eventually you start getting kind of shocky, you know, and start shivering and stuff. And then a medevac helicopter came, and these guys came down on a sling, and I can remember telling them, don't stand down, don't step down here, don't step down here. And this guy, I don't know if he could see from up there or what, or he was just the bravest guy I've ever seen. He, you know, put a sling around me, and up I went.
Once on board the medevac, Wagner had one concern.
I was on a helicopter, and I kept asking, well, frankly, have my balls been blown off? Because that's what I was worried about, because I knew they made plastic feet. And I was only about 23, and I had just other things I intended to do with my life.
With overall enemy pressure increasing and the weather worsening, the problem now was how to withdraw while still in contact with the enemy. It proved impossible to keep the highway open and secure, so many of the ARVN units were withdrawn by helicopter and often under fire. Panic occasionally set in, and some helicopter crews resorted to greasing the skids of their Hueys to prevent ARVN troops clinging to them during the evacuation process. The last elements of the 1st Infantry Division were extracted on March 21st, and the rest of the invasion force a few days later. The invading force had been driven out by the North Vietnamese with heavy losses. United States aircrew losses were 176 killed, 1,942 wounded, and 42 missing. Helicopter losses were put at 107 destroyed and 600 damaged. Lam Son proved that the ARVN troops were no match for the Communists. Sometimes war is as easy as getting from here to there. You get there first with the most, and you win. Simple, right? Could be, except nothing in war is simple. On the other side of the lines, there are bad guys who will fight and die to prevent your getting from here to there. They plan and plot and train because that is what their job is. Because moving around is as important as it is, military planners spend careers thinking about it. They fret, study, and spend taxpayer money trying to find a surefire way to get men, material, and firepower from where it is to where it needs to be. Even good planners come up with bad ideas. Military history is cluttered with embarrassing failures. Take, for example, the Whittam-Lewis XN-BL-1 Barling bomber. It's designed based on a simple idea, to build a better bomber, to build a bigger bomber. The Barling was to be the first of a generation of airborne behemoths that would allow America to strike her enemies from a safe and dignified distance. On its 1923 inaugural flight, the Barling ran into one problem: the Adirondack Mountains. The Barling couldn't gain enough altitude to get over them. The Barling quickly passed into aviation euphony, its builders into oblivion. Such is the risk of all new military systems working on the cutting edge of technology. Mistakes happen. In 1971, the U.S. Army started searching for a replacement for the HU-1 Iroquois, the first utility helicopter. The Huey was a remarkable machine, an all-purpose taxicab gunship that revolutionized combat. The odds of its replacement being as good were low. The potential for a Barling-class failure was great. Still, the Army aimed high, imagining a helicopter that would be faster than the Huey, carry heavier loads, and be less vulnerable to enemy attack. It described to aviation industry a machine with capabilities that seemed at the time nearly impossible. The Army contracted 2 prototypes. Sikorsky built the UH-60 and Boeing Vertol built the UH-61. The Army challenged the manufacturers to a duel, putting their machines through a rigorous set of tests. They fired all kinds of rounds into component parts to see how they reacted. They fired anti-aircraft rounds into fuel cells to see if they would leak. They dropped fuel cells from 50-foot cranes. They piled troops in and out of them, tucked the prototypes on the transports, and shuffled them around the country. They attached pieces of the new machines to existing operational helicopters and then crashed them. In December 1976, the Army announced that Sikorsky's had won the competition. The Army named the new helicopter Black Hawk.
The Huey was fun, but you put somebody in a Black Hawk and very few of them will want to go back to the Huey. UH-60 is really the backbone of the Army aviation in the context of getting things where they need to be quickly. Soldiers, equipment, supplies, the wounded. It is the utility helicopter for the Army, and it serves a great range because it's got such a great payload.
The first production Black Hawks were delivered to the Army in late 1978. They had 2 1,500 horsepower GE jet engines, each capable of keeping the Black Hawk flying without the other. It could climb to nearly 20,000 feet, carry a fully equipped infantry squad, and hoist artillery and small vehicles from below. Though the Black Hawk had passed its first round of tests, as the new kid on the block, it still had a lot to prove.
The UH-60 Lima Black Hawk helicopter. Any missions that I can perform during the day, I can also perform during the night. It can hold approximately 11 soldiers, sling load 8,000 pounds. The aircraft cruises at 120 knots. Power plants are 2 GE 701 Charlie engines, 1,600 horsepower apiece. Manufactured by Sikorsky. The crew consists of 4, 2 pilots, 2 crew engineers. UH-60 Lima, the Cadillac of the sky.
When the first generation of UH-60A crews started training in 1979, they discovered a machine vastly more capable than the Hueys they had been flying.
It's much faster, and carry much more in terms of cargo, internally and externally. It's a more sophisticated aircraft, but it was built with ease of maintenance in mind.
Introducing something as intricate as a new flight platform poses enormous problems. There are no 1,000-hour flight veterans to pass on the tricks of this particular trade because the tricks aren't known. The system itself is a mystery. How it acts when it's hot and tired or wet and cold may have been tested, but real-world use poses dilemmas unimagined in testing. At the same time that flight crews are adjusting to their new platform, they're also learning to work with new teams.
It takes a little while. And initially when you go out flying with a new co-pilot, you're really monitoring not only the things that you need to be doing, but you're watching to see what he's going to do, how he's going to react. So when you do get out there in that situation where it is intense flying and it's at night and there's not much room for mistakes, you know what the guy's going to do.
The pilot and co-pilot sit at identical stations so that each can, when necessary, fully control the helicopter. Instrumentation is a combination of conventional, analog dials, and LED readouts.
You got your forward panel on the aircraft that gives you all your engine indications, all the vital signs of the aircraft, if you will. And then you've got your instruments that tell you your attitude relative to the earth, your altitude, how high you are above the ground, how fast you're going. And then, of course, you've got your monitoring all your avionics. It kind of looks overwhelming, at least it did for me when I first got into the aircraft.
The pilots are not simply redundant systems. When the Black Hawk moves using nap of the earth guidance, particularly at night, there is almost no margin for error.
We'll have one pilot, the one that's on the controls, he maintains visual contact with the outside of the aircraft. We don't want him looking inside too much. The other guy, he's looking in and out. He's monitoring the instruments.
Black Hawk helicopters were designed with a crew of 4 in mind. In the cabin behind the pilot and co-pilot are stations for a crew chief and a gunner. In day-to-day use, the gunner is usually not assigned to the crew, but is added only for battle. The crew chief sits directly behind the co-pilot. He's in charge of everything that goes on in the back of the helicopter, from assigning passenger seats to hanging sling loads. As the aircraft takes off and lands, he is its rear-view mirror, making sure that the tail rotor will clear any obstacle.
We basically let the crew chief handle what's in back because we have so much stuff to do up front. So he's basically in charge of the back, no matter what rank. The personnel on the back have to listen to him.
The Black Hawk, more than any other helicopter before it, was designed to fly and keep flying in all conditions. It is the crew chief who sees to it that happens. He makes sure not only that it's ready to fly, but it stays running for the duration of its mission.
When I sit back and think about it, I realize I'm pretty lucky to have this job, and it just makes me want to keep going at it, keep trying, you know, just do the best I can.
It had to be able to take a hit. It had 2 engines, but could fly on one, and the drivetrain was designed so that if hit, it could continue to work for an hour with no oil.
There's redundancy in many systems. It's built for if one of the systems goes out, the aircraft can survive and come back to friendly lines and be repaired.
If something did bring it down, it crashed better than any aircraft in history. Its landing gear crumpled upward and its seats collapsed down, absorbing the force of most impacts. The crew compartment was nearly indestructible. It could hit the ground at 42 feet per second and fly the next day. The Black Hawk was also fast, with a cruising speed of 160 knots.
It's a utility aircraft, but it flies like a sports car to me because it's the way it was designed. It's really fast. It's one of the fastest aircraft that we have in the Army inventory, and it's real maneuverable due to the rotor system and the way it was put together. We can put a lot of forces on it that you couldn't some of the older model aircraft. So we can yank and bank, as sometimes we say, and really put it to its test.
The production UH-60 differed from the prototype in several ways. Windows were changed for improved visibility, and a fixed tail wheel replaced the prototype's retractable gear. The contours of the ship's body became more rounded. The engines originally mounted atop the helicopter's body were absorbed into it. The exhaust vents of those engines grew larger, and the subsequent models had vents further modified to cool the helicopter's exhaust and decrease its infrared visibility. Though the helicopter was compact enough to fit on air transports in times of crisis, it would be vastly more efficient if it could fly itself to a hotspot. In the Cold War atmosphere of the early 1980s, that hotspot was likely to be Central Europe. So that the Black Hawks could cross the Atlantic Ocean, the Army added removable wings that could carry up to 1,300 gallons of additional fuel. The external store support system could also be mounted with missiles and machine guns, except, of course, that the Black Hawk was not really a fighting aircraft. It was a utility helicopter, a delivery van. While it had won the respect of its own pilots, most of them straight off the HU-1, it had a second constituency waiting to be convinced. In the post-Vietnam specialization of aircraft, The attack function the Huey had invented was spun off to the Cobra and subsequently the Apache. Attack pilots, seldom reluctant to preen their wings publicly, like to call the Black Hawk pilots flying cab drivers.
They've got an outstanding aircraft too, but I don't want to be on anything that can't shoot back.
This meant that though the Black Hawk itself had gained the respect of those around it, the Black Hawk pilots still had something very substantial to prove.
Yes, I do believe we get respect. When we deal with our fellow soldiers and maneuver battalions, maneuver brigades, we're respected, highly respected.
From the outset of its operational deployment, there was little doubt that the Black Hawk would excel at its basic mission. In 1983, it performed as advertised in its first combat deployment on the Caribbean island of Grenada. There, a Marxist regime had taken a group of American medical students hostage. Marines on their way from the U.S. to the Middle East made a slight diversion to rescue the students and to depose the regime. UH-60As ferried the Marines around the island. One Black Hawk had 47 hits to crucial components, drive shafts, servos, hydraulic pumps, even the cockpit, and made it back to base. Other Black Hawks took hits to self-sealing fuel tanks, turbines, and crew compartments, and none went down. But mostly the Black Hawk worked. They got people to places and kept to their timetable. December 1989, Panama. After years of jousting with Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, the Bush administration ordered a decisive invasion of that small Central American country. In Operation Just Cause, President George H. Bush not only wanted to drive Noriega from power, but to capture him and bring him back to the United States to stand trial. If that was going to happen, all avenues of escape from Panama would have to be closed off almost instantly. The dictator, called Pineapple Face by his own people, had been under pressure for years and had carefully planned his own worst-case scenarios. It was an Air Force Special Ops variant, the UH-60G Pave Hawk, which was among the first Hawks to prove itself in battle. As UH-60As distributed troops along Panama City, Pave Hawks from Eglin Air Force Base inserted Navy SEALs into Patay Airfield. There, Noriega kept his personal aircraft, and there, the Panamanian Defense Forces mounted one of their most ferocious stands. The SEALs took heavy fire and suffered far more casualties than anticipated. The team leader radioed for help, for medevac for the wounded, and reinforcements so that they might hold their ground. Pilots wearing night vision goggles flew toward Patay, but as they got close, they lost contact with the SEALs on the ground. They mounted a desperate search. The Panamanians could hear the aircraft, but couldn't see them in the pitch-black night. The Pave Hawks headed for the sound of gunfire, found the SEALs, and headed right for the center of the firefight. Reinforcements piled off, wounded piled on, and the SEALs held their ground.
We're more of a stealth kind of aircraft. We like to get in there fast and quiet and get out, drop our soldiers off and get out. We can hold about 10 people on this aircraft with large packs, and those guys usually get inserted deep behind enemy lines.
One measure of a system's success is the number of variants that are developed, the number of different missions that the system is assigned to fulfill. Today, UH-60 variants serve a dizzying array of missions. The Air Force has Pave Hawks, the Navy has Seahawks, and the Coast Guard has Jayhawks. There are electronic warfare Hawks that can hover over a battlefield using a 1,700-pound electronics package to eavesdrop on enemy command and control. The UH-60L model, which is now the standard in the Army, has bigger engines and more sophisticated avionics. It has been tested with anti-tank missiles, though its primary mission remains delivery. What attracted the planners was the Black Hawk's basic underlying strength as a system. The ability to add components to the basic airframe made it applicable to just about every helicopter mission. Ironically, one of the missions the Black Hawk does best is getting attack pilots out of trouble. When the attackers go in, they do so knowing Black Hawks are close by, ready to get them out if they go down.
We do a lot of support for them on down aviator procedures. We do what's called combat search and rescue. So we're linked in pretty tight with those guys. It's usually planned in with a large mission like when the attack helicopters have a deliberate attack, or even if they're not on a deliberate attack, we're usually right there in the planning process.
Well, we don't have guns, but when they get shot down and the Black Hawk has to come rescue them, you know, it makes us feel a little better. Of course, we don't want them to get shot down, but yeah.
It is not only helicopter pilots that are happy to have Black Hawk backup. In Kuwait, Black Hawks flew search and rescue missions for downed fighter and bomber pilots and even missing reporters. It's also worth remembering that when all is said and done, a typical Black Hawk pilot accrues about 100 hours a year more flight time than a typical Apache pilot, and flight time is, after all, what pilots live for. Needless to say that for all the lack of respect that Black Hawks get from attack pilots, the UH-60 and its variants have become a favorite of infantrymen.
So you put them in the back of the aircraft and you take off flying low and fast because that's part of our mission.
If we're going on a long flight, they'll be back here. It'll put someone to sleep, but when that, you know, if coming down or if it slams a collective down, they be peeling their stomachs off the soundproofing.
You know, the first time you get a holler from the back or a yay or you know, the guys screaming and hollering, you look back and you see big smiles on their face.
You know, there's no way to describe it. Most of them expect it to be like a roller coaster. They get on here, you know, thinking that, and we'll give them a ride, you know, depending on what kind of mood the pilots are in. But